Lutherans are funny creatures, and I say that as a Lutheran. We do some weird looking things, weird to the outside watching world outside of Christianity, weird even to other Christians, even to other Christians who have our kind of brand of following the church's ancient teaching while also being new and innovative. We're weird among Christians. It's maybe time to own a little bit of that weirdness. And this coming Sunday is one of the times in particular when we Lutherans do something particularly weird in a Lutheran way. We stop our usual order of things, especially in our scripture readings that have been tracing through the gospel according to Matthew, sort of following one long story over Sunday by Sunday by Sunday. And we stop and we pause to remember the beginning of the Reformation movement that we trace back to this guy, Martin Luther, who is sort of like an older brother in the faith, somebody who asked good questions ahead of us and pointed us in the right direction, but never would have claimed for himself to have all the answers or to always be right, but rather pointed the way for us in ways that we can continue in his footsteps, asking good questions and looking where he pointed us. And that's really something important for us to talk about now, because for the watching world, it's weird for other people to go, wait a second, I thought you were Christian, why are you all of a sudden talking about this guy? Who is he, and why is he important? Good question. In fact, I think maybe the question, whether you are brand new to thinking about being a Lutheran Christian or have been a Lutheran for all your life long, maybe the question that our faith tradition really is all about is what happens when we ask the question, what if I've been wrong? What if I've been wrong about the things I always thought or had been taught or somebody else told me about God or about the world or about the meaning of everything? What if I've been wrong? How would I deal with that? How would I know? For all the ways that Lutherans can pride ourselves on our heritage of 500 years and our catechism of here's the Lutheran answer to whatever question might come up, really ours is a tradition that's about asking, what if I've been wrong about something? How would I deal with it? How would I know? And how would I get back on track? It's the openness to being corrected and changed, to be reforming. That's an important piece. To be a Lutheran Christian, at our best, is to be someone who's constantly open to the question, here's what I think, but what if I'm wrong? How would I know? And how do we start over again? How do things need to get reformed, put back together, maybe sometimes taken apart and then reconstructed, so that I can faithfully seek after God, so that I can faithfully follow Jesus. The particulars of how Martin Luther began that own quest of his own in the 1500s is a long conversation, but the long and the short of it comes to someone who had been trained in the official teaching of the church of his day, grown up and was a teacher and professor of it, and the more and more he thought it through, the more he thought there were things that were inconsistent, that didn't make sense, and it forced him to ask that question, what if what I've been taught, what if what all my other Bible teachers, theology teachers, other people have told me, what if we don't have all the answers after all? And it drove him back to, well, where do we get our sense about God from in the first place? He went back to the scriptures instead of other people's systematic theologies or what everybody had always told him, and went to look there again. Wait a second, what does the scripture say about God? What does Jesus show me about who God is? And in particular, if I'm convinced that the cross and resurrection of Jesus are at the heart of who Jesus is, and Jesus is the beating heart of who God is, that's where we start, and we work out from there, rather than, this is what I've always been taught, I'll just trust that it's right. To be a Christian in the mold and in the pattern of Martin Luther isn't just, have you memorized what the catechism says, or do you know all the words to a mighty fortress is our God by heart, but it's to ask the question, what if I've been wrong about things? And could I deal with that? Could my assumption of my rightness be less important than actually connecting with the living God? And am I willing to let go of a lot of the assumptions I've made about how God operates or what God is like, in order to really connect with the living God. That's a hard, lifelong thing to do. And at our best, we Lutherans are constantly going back to asking that question. What if I've been wrong? How would I know? And what will bring me back into good connection, right connection with who God is in Jesus? Knowing that my rightness or wrongness was never what made me acceptable to God in the first place. And I think that's the central hitch for Lutheran Christianity, is that we can be people who dare to ask those big questions, who are willing to go, wow, there's a lot of things I think or believe or have been taught about God. What if I've been wrong? And then to rest in the, you know what? My status before God isn't reducible to my grade on a theology exam or the rightness or wrongness, but rather God's grace has grabbed hold of me. God's at work bringing me to faith. So even that process of sorting through the things I've always been taught and maybe discovering some of that was chaff and some of it was substance, some of it was solid and some of it was shifting sand, even that process is holy and part of how God grabs hold of us, pulls us into relationship. In a world like ours, in a culture, in a time like ours, when, man, it is so easy for everybody to be certain of their rightness and then dig in their heels and say, I'm right, and therefore if you disagree with me, you must be wrong, and I'm not even willing to consider the possibility that I have something to learn from you. It's a kind of radical thing to do what Martin Luther did. Not just to repeat back or parrot his answers, but to do the hard work Martin Luther did, which is to take all the things you've been taught and that people have said, this is definitely the answer, don't even question it, and to say, wait a second, when I go back to the scriptures, when I actually look at the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, when I start at the cross, it throws a lot of other things up in the air. Am I willing to risk that possibility? And am I willing to allow myself to be humble enough to go, God doesn't love me because of my rightness. God doesn't love me because I get a certain score in my theology exam, whether in this life or after death at the gates of heaven. God's love for me is independent of my rightness or wrongness, even my goodness or badness. But God's love comes to me by grace through Jesus, and that's not something I can earn or achieve or get an A on. It's simply a gift. To take that seriously and to let everything else sort of get sorted out in light of that, that's what it is to be a Lutheran Christian today. And it's why we have been willing to be weird, and every year on the last Sunday in October, getting close in time as we can on the calendar to that time when Martin Luther famously posted 95 theses for debate, right? These were points of discussion, arguing, trying to figure out, get at truth, and being willing to let go of the assumptions of what he'd been taught, what everybody had told him was the way things worked. That's the tradition we grow into. If we get cocky, if we get arrogant and assume we've got all the answers and everybody just needs to come to us to get the right answers, we've lost the spirit of what our older brother in the faith, Martin, did. But rather, if we let this moment, and maybe every day, every week, be a chance to say, God, there's probably some stuff I've got wrong. Help me to see where I've got things wrong. Help me even to discover a joy in being wrong, to know that your love holds me, and that your love isn't dependent on my rightness or wrongness, on my theology, but that you're willing to help start over with me. Bring me back to the things that are solid and true. Bring me back to Jesus, and let me go from there. The God whom we know in Jesus' love, the God whom we know at the cross, the God whom we know in the one who hangs out with the sinners and outcasts, who feeds everybody, who brings good news to the poor, who's willing to speak up and stand up to the powerful and tell the truth. That Jesus is the place we start, even if that means reevaluating everything else. That's work that's worth committing to. That's work that's worth continuing to go back to. And that's what we're doing this coming Sunday, and maybe every Sunday of our lives. But join us this Sunday as we celebrate the Reformation and the joy that there can be in really facing the question, what if I've been wrong? And what if I've been loved anyway? See you Sunday.